lot of veteran groups that are concerned about the deluge of returning veterans, and not even to mention some of the special injuries and things, but just simply, you know, the benefits that they have, the need for education, job placement. What is this budget cut, the sequestration, going to do for veterans or to veterans?
The good news is nothing, because the Veterans Administration, which is a separate budget from the Department of Defense, and I can't emphasize that too much, because when I tell people, gee, we can cut defense spending back, they'll say, well, those brave young men and women, what they did. No, that's a different department, the Veterans Administration. They got some small administrative cuts, but by and large, the agency budget, which, by the way, after the Department of Defense, is the second largest budget in the federal government, is the Department of Veterans Affairs. So it won't. Now, the problem that the VA has and the Pentagon, they never got their computer systems to work together. The Bush administration never anticipated the wars, going on that long and having so many people wounded both physically and mentally, that the Veterans Administration is playing catch-up ball. And General Shinseki, who was Army Chief of Staff, who, by the way, warned Bush that you go into Iraq, you're going to need several 100,000 troops, and they just put him aside. He's almost overwhelmed trying to deal with us, and it's going to take a while till we catch up. And that is rather unfortunate. But I think here's again, you got to think, when you go to war, you need to think about those things. How are you going to pay for it? You got to raise taxes. And the raise taxes not just to pay for it, but to take care of those veterans. Sure. And I mean, we just didn't think of that. And so we should have been expanding the Veterans Administration. But you had an administration and members of Congress and the media in denial that these wars were going to go on so long and be so costly. So we're trying to play catch-up ball now. And it's really tough on these young men and young women, the problems that they have. The one good thing is you have the Hagel-Webb GI Bill, which is comparatively generous, much more generously had in Vietnam, and so that does help them go to school. But American employers have got to recognize that these are leaders. These men and women, they know how to lead, they know how to deal with stress, and you can teach them the substantive skills, but somebody needs to get that across, because we've had so many people haven't served for so long.
And will the defense cuts also cut back on the kinds of jobs that veterans might go into?
The least amount of jobs you're going to create is in the defense industry. Okay? Because again, a lot of these jobs are pretty high tech and things like that, and they're not that much manpower intensive as they used to be. The most effective way would be to put it into like rebuilding our infrastructure, education, health, even a tax deduction. In other words, if I cut defense and I can cut taxes, I'm going to create more jobs than I did with putting that money into defense. It's the least efficient way. And we should buy what we need to defend the country, but we shouldn't do it for economic purposes.
Let's talk about drones. I know that's one of the big innovations that you talked about coming out of the 70s, and but a lot of people find them, a lot of people around the world, I think, find them, deadly, really, and maybe it's even deadly for our image. And the values that we stand for as Americans. I think a lot of Americans are uncomfortable with the notion that these machines are up there. So what do you think that's a good tool? I mean, is it a cost-saving thing? Why are we doing this?
War has become more and more technologically sophisticated, Until World War I, you really never had the airplanes or tanks, okay? And then, of course, we got into, missiles. Using a drone is an act of war. Just like firing artillery or sending a manned plane, it's an act of war. And I think you have to look at it that way. Now, because we don't expose men and women's lives on the battlefield, people then might be more willing to use it. No, you should think about it. In other words, is this use of force justified? Then if it is justified, then of course you take a look what's the most cost-effective way to do it. And it's important because I think too many people, since it doesn't seem to cost any lives and it's comparatively inexpensive compared to buying a fighter plane or a bomber, they don't apply the same criteria they need to. And even if you didn't want to uphold your values, the fact is other countries are going to get them soon too. Yes. I mean, it's just as the airplane became, involved in war and cruise missiles did, this is going to be the latest development. And so I think it's not just us, but the international community needs to come up with some rules for how we use those things and what are the, circumstances.
I'd like to know what you think about the Simpson-Bowles cuts. If that were to be enacted, what impact would that have on the defense budget? Well,
I think the Simpson-Bowles cuts, which if you look at the Budget Control Act and sequester, are about the same amount, roughly $970 billion over 10 years cuts. I like the Simpson-Bowles approach better than sequester, because sequester you cut everything equally, whereas they go and they tell you, what things to cut. And they take a look at a lot of the, the weapon systems which are not performing, performing well. They take a look at some of the bloated staffs, and things like that we have. Again, as we discussed earlier, when the budget goes up, you didn't worry about, things like that. So they make a lot of sensible proposals to bring defense spending, and a lot of other areas. And I think President Obama, when he leaves office and looks back, so maybe I should have embraced Simpson-Bowles.
So do you think the cuts could be even deeper than Simpson-Bowles?
I think Simpson-Bowles, given where we are and the things, would be about right. I think Simpson-Bowles plus, in other words, take us back to the Cold War average, $475 billion, okay? And, we don't have an existential threat. Yes, the world is unstable, but there's nothing like the Soviet Union with its, tens of thousands of nuclear weapons, thousands of ships and tanks and planes and millions of, men and women under arms. You don't have anything like that, today that you have to deal with.
And China, not a threat? Not a big enough threat to?
China, the big challenge is going to be to integrate China into the international system. We're going to have to be very careful and use, very, very, I think, skillful diplomacy to deal with them. I think that the Pentagon last year, and Secretary Panetta made a mistake when they said, well, with the budget coming down, we're going to pivot to Asia. Well, that got the Europeans and the people of the Middle East all upset. I think you said, well, we're going to, make sure we don't draw down in Asia, keep sufficient force there. And then they said, we're going to go to a concept called air-land battle. They should have said air-land operations, because who are you going to battle? Well, the Chinese look at that and they say, well, they must be coming after us. And the Chinese is very interesting. I think to a certain extent they kind of overplayed their hand in some of the things going after the disputed islands, in the South China Sea, because now the Filipinos who kicked us out, back in the 1990s from Clark and Subic Base, they want us back. Even Vietnam wants us, to be with them. And so basically, I think if we play it carefully and, we make it clear to the Chinese, we don't we don't want to conquer them. We understand they're not an expansionist, power. And, I tell people our relationship with China, during the Cold War, our relationship with the Soviet Union was called MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction, because we both had tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. A former ambassador to NATO told me this term one time, and he said, it's MAD with China. I said, what do you mean? He said, Mutual Assured Depression. Because if they don't lend, we won't buy. And, people say, well, look, they're the second coming of the Soviet Union. We never lent money to, the Soviet Union never lent us money, and we didn't buy Soviet goods. So, yes, they are an economic power, and, they have a vested interest in keeping what people call the global commons or the global stable. So, as we do, because they got to get oil from, other countries in the world to keep their economy going. And the other thing about China, I think if we're patient, if you look at China and you say, okay, can they keep growing like this forever? Well, the one-child policy means they're not going to have enough young people to take care of the old. At some point, they got a housing bubble that looks like ours did, and things. And even the Chinese military budget, they spend half of it on personnel. Of course, with their economy growing, they got to pay people, to stay in. And I look at the quality of their leadership. A lot of the leaders, the military leaders, are rewarded more for their loyalty to the party than their, combat skills. So yes, I think you need to be concerned. You need to work with them, require delicate diplomacy. And if I can put a word in this one, my son's in the Foreign Service, going to go over there. He'll take care of all these things.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today at World Denver
me.
Talks.